What happens when a billionaire insults a waitress in a language he believes she cannot understand, only to hear her answer back fluently and calmly, flipping the power of the entire room in seconds? Have you ever noticed how one careless sentence, one quiet insult, can completely change the energy of a place? That is exactly what happened on a warm Thursday afternoon inside a high-end restaurant in Scottsdale, Arizona, where confidence, arrogance, and dignity collided in a way no one present would ever forget. The restaurant itself looked like perfection, carefully designed to impress. Marble counters gleamed under soft lighting. Polished wooden tables reflected years of careful upkeep. Low background music floated through the room, just loud enough to soothe nerves but quiet enough to remind everyone they were somewhere expensive. Waiters and waitresses moved smoothly between tables, carrying trays with practiced balance, the kind that only comes from countless long shifts and aching feet. Every movement felt controlled and intentional. That is where Danielle Rodas worked. She was not the kind of waitress people overlooked easily. She carried herself with quiet self-assurance. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, her apron spotless, her notepad always ready. Her smile was polite but never fake. Regular customers knew her name. She remembered their usual orders, asked about their children, and listened when they spoke. She did more than serve food. She treated people like they mattered. That afternoon, however, the man seated at the corner table by the window was not someone who valued that kind of attention. His name was Fayed Al-Mansouri, a billionaire businessman from Dubai, visiting Arizona for a series of high-level meetings. His suit was perfectly tailored, the kind that seemed custom-made down to the last stitch. His gold watch caught the light every time he moved his wrist, heavy and unmistakably expensive. Everything about him said he was used to being obeyed. When Danielle approached his table, the atmosphere shifted slightly. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome. May I start you off with a drink?" Her voice was calm and professional, pen poised above her notepad. Fayed did not look up at first. His eyes remained fixed on his phone as he scrolled, clearly more interested in whatever was on the screen than the person standing in front of him. A few seconds passed before he finally glanced up, gave her a quick, dismissive look, and said, "Water with lemon, nothing else. No thank you, no acknowledgement, just words delivered like an order." Danielle nodded, the kind of nod service workers learn early on. "Of course, I will bring that right away." She turned to walk toward the bar, but just as she did, Fayed leaned slightly toward the younger man sitting across from him, an associate who looked eager to please. In Arabic, Fayed muttered something under his breath. The tone alone made the meaning clear. It was not kind, it was not neutral. It was an insult said with confidence, assuming no one else could understand. Danielle returned moments later with the glass of water, setting it down carefully in front of him. Her smile did not change, but her eyes caught the faint curl of his lip, the smugness that followed his whispered remark. Over the years, she had heard enough Arabic to recognize its rhythm and edge. She understood far more than he realized. Fayed, however, remained unaware. He scrolled through his phone again, tossing another comment in Arabic toward his associate. A short laugh followed, careless and dismissive. He believed he controlled the space around him. He believed he was the smartest person in the room, but arrogance often hides the truth in plain sight. Danielle Rodas was not just a waitress. She had a history, a depth he could not see, and a voice he was about to hear. But before that moment arrived, the tension had to build slowly, like a storm forming far away before it breaks. Danielle did not react immediately. Years in the service industry had taught her how to stay composed. You learn to handle customers who ignore you, customers who unload their problems on you, and customers who think money gives them the right to treat others poorly. She wrote his order on her pad even though she already remembered it. It was not the simplicity of the order that bothered her. It was the tone, the entitlement, the way he spoke in Arabic while looking at her as though she were invisible. "Sir, would you like to hear today's specials?" Her voice remained even. Fayed barely lifted his eyes. "I said water. Do you need me to repeat myself?" His accent was heavy, his words sharp, each one carrying a hint of contempt. The associate shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. He did not know whether to laugh, agree, or say nothing at all. He chose silence, staring down at the table. Danielle nodded and stepped away, heading back toward the bar. A fellow waiter named Brandon noticed the exchange and leaned closer. "Everything all right over there?" he asked quietly. Danielle shrugged lightly. Some people see the tray, not the person holding it. As she turned back toward Faird's table, she noticed him watching her again. Not with interest or curiosity, but with evaluation, like someone judging an object. He leaned toward his associate once more and spoke sharply in Arabic. This time the insult was unmistakable. He commented on her appearance, her posture, the way she spoke. Danielle's jaw tightened for a moment, but she said nothing, not yet. She approached the table again. "Have you had a chance to look at the menu?" she asked, directing the question to both men. Faird finally set his phone down and met her gaze. "Bring me the lamb. Make sure it is not overcooked. I do not trust kitchens in this country." She wrote it down without comment. The associate spoke quickly, almost relieved to be addressed. "I will have the salmon, please." "Of course," Danielle replied, her smile warmer for him. "Would you like rice or vegetables?" "Vegetables," he said, grateful for the simple respect. Danielle turned away, but Faird's laughter followed her, another quiet insult tossed in Arabic, careless and cruel. What Faird did not know was that Danielle had spent years of her childhood in Morocco, living with her grandmother after her parents divorced. He did not know Arabic was not just something she studied, but something woven into her upbringing, her memories, and her identity. She understood every word he spoke. In the kitchen, Danielle handed in the order and paused for a moment, resting her hands on the counter. Her heart was steady. She was not angry, but something inside her shifted. This was not just another rude customer. This was a lesson waiting to happen. She adjusted her apron and returned to the dining room. The restaurant buzzed with low conversation. Plates clinked softly. Glasses tapped against tables. People talked business. Families shared meals. Couples leaned close in quiet discussion. No one was paying attention to Faird yet. Danielle approached with a basket of bread and butter, placing it gently on the table. "Here is some bread while you wait," she said. Faird did not thank her. He looked at the basket as though it were beneath him. Turning to his associate, he muttered in Arabic, just loud enough for Danielle to hear, "Cheap, just like the one serving it." Her hands paused for a fraction of a second on the table's edge. Her face revealed nothing, but the words hit hard. It was not the first insult she had heard in her life, but it was the assumption behind it that stung the most. The associate glanced nervously at Danielle but remained silent. She straightened, "In joy," she said softly and turned away. "Not yet." Faird leaned back, loosening his tie, and spoke again in Arabic, louder this time. "Look at the way she walks, like she owns the place, a waitress with attitude." A nearby couple glanced over, sensing something wrong even without understanding the language. Danielle stopped mid-step, gripping her notepad. Years of dismissal echoed in her mind, years of being underestimated. She took a breath. When she returned to refill his water, she poured slowly, meeting his eyes. He leaned forward, confident, and said in Arabic, "She should be grateful we let her work here. A woman like that belongs in the kitchen, not in front of me." Danielle set the glass down carefully. The room seemed to grow quieter. She stepped back and spoke in calm, fluent Arabic. "Would you like more bread, sir, or are the insults enough?" Faird froze. His phone nearly slipped from his hand. His associate stared in shock. "You speak Arabic?" he stammered. "Fluently," Danielle replied, and in that moment everything began to change. Faird stared at her as if the ground beneath him had shifted. For the first time since he sat down, his confidence cracked. His associate's mouth hung open, eyes darting between Danielle and Faird, unsure whether to speak or disappear into the chair. The surrounding tables had gone quieter, not silent, but attentive in that subtle way people get when they sense something important unfolding. Fayed tried to recover quickly. He forced a short laugh, sharp and uneasy. "So you learned a few phrases," he said in Arabic. "That does not mean you understood everything." Danielle did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "I understood every word," she replied in Arabic, clear and steady, "from the moment you sat down." The associate leaned back slowly, one hand covering his mouth. He looked embarrassed, not just for Fayed, but for himself for sitting there and saying nothing. A couple at the nearby table exchanged glances. They could not understand the words, but they could read faces, posture, the sudden shift in power. Fayed's jaw tightened. He glanced around and realized people were watching. He was no longer invisible in the corner. His presence had become a spotlight. "You misunderstand me," he said, his tone softer now, less commanding. Danielle switched to English so the room could hear. "No, sir, I did not." A quiet ripple moved through the nearest tables. Someone inhaled sharply. Another person whispered something under their breath. Fayed shifted in his seat, suddenly aware that the language barrier he thought protected him was gone. He straightened his shoulders, trying to regain control. "Do you think because you speak Arabic you are my equal?" he asked, his words edged with defensiveness. "I do not need to think it," Danielle answered calmly. "I know it." Her words landed with weight. Even those who did not understand Arabic felt it. Respect, confidence, and truth have a way of crossing language. Fayed scoffed. "Money decides power," he said. "Always has." Danielle tilted her head slightly. "Money buys comfort," she replied. "It does not buy dignity." The associate shifted again, clearly uncomfortable. "Fayed," he whispered, "maybe we should lower our voices." Fayed snapped back at him in Arabic, irritation flaring. "Stay out of this." Danielle crossed her arms loosely, relaxed but firm. "Every word you have spoken here," she said in Arabic, "says far more about you than it does about me." The room felt heavy now. Folks paused midair. Conversation slowed. Even the staff near the kitchen doorway watched quietly. Danielle took a slow breath and continued, her voice softer but steady. "My grandmother raised me in Casablanca," she said. "She taught me this language when I was a child. She taught me that words can wound or heal. You chose to wound." Fayed frowned. "Casablanca?" he repeated, disbelief creeping into his voice. She nodded and switched back to English. "My parents divorced when I was young. I lived with my grandmother for years. She did not speak English. If I wanted to know her, I had to learn Arabic. That language is my childhood." The weight of her words settled over the room. A woman nearby dabbed her eyes. A man at the bar shook his head slowly. "So when you insult me in Arabic," Danielle continued, "you insult the woman who raised me, you insult my history." Fayed swallowed. His bravado faltered. "I did not know," he muttered. "That is the problem." Danielle replied, "You did not care to know." The associate leaned forward slightly, his voice respectful now. "Your grandmother sounds like a strong woman." "She was," Danielle said. "She taught me that dignity is about how you treat people who can do nothing for you." Those words hung in the air. They were simple, but they struck deep. Fayed looked around again. Eyes met his, not with admiration, but with quiet judgment. He shifted in his chair, suddenly smaller without realizing why. At that moment, the restaurant manager, Charles Vega, stepped closer. He had been watching from a distance, reading the room. "Is there an issue here?" he asked calmly. Fayed jumped at the chance to regain footing. "Yes," he said quickly. "Your waitress is being unprofessional." Charles glanced at Danielle, then back at Fayed. "I have been listening," he said evenly. "She has handled herself with more professionalism than most people would." A low murmur of agreement moved through the room. Fayed's face flushed. "I am the customer," he snapped. "That is how this works." Danielle met his eyes. "That is how you think it works." The associate finally spoke louder. "Fayed, stop. You are not winning this." That sentence hit harder than anything Danielle had said. Fayed froze. His authority cracked in front of everyone. "You asked earlier if I thought I was your equal," Danielle said softly. "I do not need your approval to be one." A woman whispered, "She is right." A man nodded slowly. Charles folded his hands calmly. Sir, you are welcome to finish your meal quietly. If this continues, I will have to ask you to leave. Ferd nodded stiffly, eyes down. The control he valued so deeply had slipped through his fingers. Danielle straightened her notepad. Your lamb will be out shortly, she said, professional as ever. She walked away, and the room finally exhaled. When the food arrived, she set the plate down with the same grace she gave every guest. No sarcasm, no lingering stare, just quiet dignity. Ferd ate in silence. Halfway through, he spoke softly in Arabic. You speak beautifully. It is not the language, Danielle replied. It is the respect behind it. When he left cash on the table, she did not look at it. Respect matters more than tips, she said. Ferd nodded once, not an apology but close. As he left, the room felt lighter. Conversations returned. Plates clinked again. Danielle returned to work, calm and steady. The lesson stayed. Respect is never optional. As the door closed behind Ferd and his associate, the restaurant seemed to release a breath it had been holding for far too long. The low hum of conversation slowly returned, but it was different now. Softer, more thoughtful. People spoke in quieter tones, as if they did not want to disturb what had just happened. A few customers glanced toward Danielle as she moved between tables, her posture calm, her expression unchanged, as if the moment had not shaken the room to its core. Charles, the manager, watched her for a second before returning to his station. He had seen many confrontations in his years in hospitality, but rarely one handled with such composure. Danielle did not celebrate. She did not look for approval. She simply did her job the same way she always had, with steady hands and a clear sense of self. At one table, an older woman leaned toward her husband and whispered. That took courage. He nodded slowly, eyes still following Danielle. That took dignity. Danielle stopped by another table to refill water glasses. A young couple smiled at her warmly. You handled that beautifully. The woman said softly, Thank you. Danielle replied with a small smile. I hope you are enjoying your meal. She moved on without lingering, not wanting attention, not needing it. The strength of what she had said did not come from applause. It came from truth. In the kitchen, a few staff members exchanged looks. One cook shook his head in disbelief. I thought he was going to explode. Another whispered. Danielle stepped inside briefly to pick up an order. Brandon looked at her and let out a quiet breath. That was something. He said, You okay? She nodded. I am. And she was, because this moment had not been about anger or revenge. It had been about drawing a line and standing on it without shaking. Outside, Ferd paused near the sidewalk. The Arizona sun felt harsh against his face. Cars passed by. People laughed somewhere down the street. Life moved forward without noticing who he was or how much money he had. His associate stood beside him, silent for a moment. You did not have to push it that far. The associate said finally, not accusatory, just tired. Ferd did not respond right away. He stared ahead, jaw tight. The image of Danielle's steady eyes replayed in his mind. Not angry, not afraid, just firm. She embarrassed me. Ferd muttered. The associate shook his head slowly. No, you embarrassed yourself. The words lingered between them. Ferd opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. For once, there was nothing clever to say. Back inside, Danielle cleared another table. As she wiped the surface, she thought briefly of her grandmother, of the small apartment in Casablanca, of the smell of spices in the market, of evenings spent listening to stories in a language that shaped her sense of belonging. She could almost hear her grandmother's voice reminding her that pride spoken loudly often hides weakness, while dignity spoken softly carries strength. Charles approached her near the bar. You handled that like a professional. He said quietly, if you need a break, I am good. Danielle replied, thank you. He nodded, respect clear in his eyes. The rest of the shift passed smoothly. Customers smiled more. Some thanked her more sincerely than usual. One man left a note on the receipt that simply read, thank you for reminding us what respect looks like. When her shift finally ended, Danielle untied her apron and hung it neatly. She stepped outside into the cooling evening air, feeling lighter than she had in days. Not because she had won anything, but because she had stayed true to herself. That night, the story followed her home, but not in a heavy way. It felt complete, a chapter closed with honesty instead of regret. Somewhere else in the city, Ferd sat alone in his hotel room, the silence pressing in. He replayed the moment again and again, the way the room had turned. The way control had slipped. For the first time in a long time, he questioned something deeper than a deal or a decision. He questioned himself. Money could open doors, it always had, but that day it could not close a mouth that spoke truth. And that truth lingered far longer than any insult ever could. The lesson was simple, even if it was uncomfortable. Titles fade, wealth changes hands, power shifts, but respect is built in moments, lost in seconds, and remembered long after the bill is paid. Danielle slept peacefully that night, and the restaurant in Scottsdale returned to its usual rhythm the next day. New customers, new orders, new conversations, but for those who had been there, the memory stayed sharp. A reminder that the strongest voice in a room does not always belong to the richest person. Sometimes it belongs to the one who refuses to be silent. Treat people with dignity always.